What's going on, Headliner Nation? Kyle back with the Fantasy Headliners. We're getting prepared here for Week 8, and that means taking a look at what players may or may not be on your waiver wire and who you should be targeting to add to your rosters before games kick off for Week 8. A common mistake I see a lot of fantasy owners make is that they overlook some guys. They're like, it's just one performance, or they just did this, or they just did that, or I got to see more. And sometimes you got to be willing to jump out there on a limb and say, you know what, I got to add this guy before everybody else. Well, we've got some deep stashes. We've got some guys that you already know about on this show, but we're going to jump into it right now so we can determine who you need to be targeting this week. All right, Headliners, we're going to be taking a look at running backs to kick things off here. And first and foremost, Wayne Gallman from the New York Giants. Now, do we really want to be adding Wayne Gallman? Probably not. If you're adding him right now, you're a little bit, in desperation mode. But this has been a crazy year, all right? So crazier things have happened, and honestly, we're at a point where we can't judge who we're picking and who we're not picking up. Sometimes if you need the depth, you just grab guys that might be getting touches. So for Wayne Gallman, Freeman ended up leaving early last week. He left that game. He's a little bit banged up. What are we going to see from him? They are taking up Tampa Bay this week. It's going to be a really tough matchup for them. But he had 15 touches for 54 total yards and a touchdown. If they can get anywhere near the goal line, Wayne Gallman probably still going to be a guy that they will use. But again, we kind of have to keep an eye on Devonta Freeman and see what happens with him throughout the week. If Freeman ends up being out, then Gallman might be a guy that you just have to run with this week if you really are desperate. I know some of you are out there. Hopefully not too many of you. La'Mical Pirine, 1.2% owned for the New York Jets. On the live show this week, somebody asked me about La'Mical Pirine, and I was like, I almost said start him, and I didn't. But he did end up scoring a touchdown last week. He basically split touches with Gore. Now, Gore is someone else to keep an eye on as well if he's still available in your leagues. But, with Pirine only being 1.2% owned and their matchup coming up with Kansas City this week, you're probably going to see a little bit more Pirine because he's going to be the guy in the passing game that will get a little bit more looks than Gore. Again, split touches with Gore last week. Pirine did have 13 touches for 55 total yards and a touchdown. So again, maybe more of that passing work this week. Gio Bernard from Cincinnati, he is 35% owned. More than likely, he's been picked up in a lot of leagues. So I would say maybe 10% of you watching this video actually don't have him available in your league. Don't forget, these ownership percentages are not mine. I have nothing to do with this. If you have an issue with these ownership percentages, call your local fantasy football website that you use for your platform. It's not me. Don't get upset with me, okay? I have nothing to do with this. But is Mixon going to end up being out again? There is a possibility he's week to week. He may not be back this week either. If that happens, going up against the Tennessee Titans, a team that's going to really want to come out and put Cincinnati in the ground, bounce back this week, they could be passing a lot. Now, kind of what we said last week with Gio Bernard. Do you really want to play him? You don't want to play him, but if you have to, he's got a decent floor. Now, come the Saturday night show when we knew for a fact that Mixon would be out, we were like, yep, that's a better option. Yep, that's a better option. So Gio was a lot better option than what some of you had. If some of you had Mixon and Gio is all that you have left, then yes, we are going to probably be starting him again. Just keep in mind that the ceiling's probably not going to be that high with them. It hasn't been that high with Mixon all year, so is it really going to be that high with Gio at any point in time? Probably not. JaMycal Hasty from San Francisco. He is next up, 2.7% owned, going up against Seattle. Wilson had a huge game. He goes down with an injury. Mostert's down with an injury. Jerick McKinnon is irrelevant now, apparently, for the San Francisco 49ers. Who knows? Maybe he ends up playing more this week, and Shanahan's just here to mess with all of us. But JaMycal Hasty from San Francisco is a guy that San Francisco has talked a lot about loving this year. I mean, we've seen reports from them saying that Hasty could be a guy in the future they really like to have in the lineup more often. So he could end up being a guy that gets a few more touches this week against Seattle. Chase Edmonds is going to be on a bye, but we're awaiting an MRI from Kenyon Drake right now. So I wanted to toss Chase Edmonds back on here. A lot of people after that Drake performance last week probably bounced out on him and said, no, never mind. I'm not going to be interested because it looks like Drake is back. And then lo and behold, look, Drake ends up going down with an injury this week, and now Edmonds may be stepping back in to start. Remember, Drake right now, as of this recording, has not had that MRI, so we don't know for sure the extent of his injury. They are going into a bye, but if you need a running back, Edmonds will not be available next week. And even if you're thinking, Drake he'll be fine, still might be worth picking up Edmonds. Carlos Hyde, 2.5% owned, going up against his former team, San Francisco. Carson has a mid-foot sprain. They are doing some tests today to determine the extent of the injury and how long he may end up being out. But Hyde will be the starter if Chris Carson misses any time. Again, another guy to pick up going up against San Francisco, who they could run a little bit on. Seattle's still trying to run the ball quite a bit. Carlos Hyde could definitely be a guy that will be a very safe floor for you for the coming weeks with no Chris Carson. Zach Moss from Buffalo. I don't love this one. He is 30% owned going up against New England. He basically split touches with Devin Singletary this past week. He played a little bit better, but when you watch the film on Zach Moss, he just hasn't been that good. And obviously the injuries are something that continues to be an issue for him even outside of college. So I don't really love the Zach Moss pickup, but wanted to mention him as well. And then Tony Pollard from Dallas, 6.3% owned going up against Philadelphia. With Tony Pollard, the thing that concerns me about Dallas is they're just going to have to dump the ball off a lot. They're on quarterback number 3 now. And because of that, they might not be able to push the ball down the field. So Tony Pollard is a guy that they may need to get out there a little bit more. And, if Dallas continues to lose, maybe they don't want to put Zeke out there as much. Maybe they want to save their guy for when they are competitive again next year and get Tony Pollard a little bit more work this year. So keep an eye on those touches and those snap counts, because Tony Pollard is a guy that, even though he's not really worth anything right now, over the next couple of weeks, especially in PPR leagues, he'd become a whole lot more valuable. Moving on to wide receivers now. Sterling Shepard, a guy that a lot of people were taking a shot at to begin the season, has dealt with some injuries this year, hasn't really been on the field, and because of that has dropped down under 30% owned. Last week comes out and catches 6 balls on 8 targets for 59 yards and a touchdown. Not bad for his return. Again, going up against Tampa Bay this week, not the best matchup in the world for him, but more than likely they are going to be down quite a bit. And if they are down quite a bit, they're going to be throwing more. And if they throw more, that means more opportunities for Sterling Shepard. So again, another, low ceiling guy, but probably a decent floor because he's going to see a lot of passes this week, a lot of targets. Denzel Mims from the New York Jets. Had Brashad Perryman on here last week. Brashad Perryman took one heck of a shot, though. Mims might be the guy moving forward that's going to be the healthiest of all of them. He's 0.3% owned, and going up against Kansas City, they're going to have to throw the ball a lot. So he's a guy that's going to see quite a bit of targets. Now, if Crowder can get back, that's going to help Mims a little bit, because then Mims isn't going to be the sole guy out there trying to be the number 1 target. So hopefully Crowder is back this week. But Mims, again, another guy that's going to be seeing a lot of volume. So even though the ceiling might not be really high, the floor is going to be there for him. Rashard Higgins from Cleveland, 0.1% owned, going up against Las Vegas. Last week, OBJ going out of the game, finding out just recently he has a torn ACL. Last week, Rashard Higgins, 6 catches on 6 targets for 110 yards. Rashard Higgins is a guy that has shown that he has the ability to hurt people when the opportunity calls on it. And he's got an opportunity right now with no OBJ the rest of the year. Donovan Peoples-Jones, also a guy that's not owned in fantasy leagues that you could take a shot on if he's in deeper leagues. Because more than likely moving forward, you're going to see Higgins, DPJ, and then you're going to see in the slot Landry probably quite a bit moving forward with no OBJ. So Donovan Peoples-Jones and Rashard Higgins, both guys for you to take a shot on. And then going up against Las Vegas, I kind of like his ceiling against Las Vegas. 6 catches for 110 yards. If he can get around the same thing next week, even if he doesn't score, he'll still be a flex option at worst. AJ Green from Cincinnati is going to make his return to really any type of relevancy at this point. He is about 50% owned and probably is owned in a majority of leagues, but I've seen a lot of people asking if they should drop him, so I would not be surprised if AJ Green is not floating around on waivers in some of your leagues. Over the last 2 games, he has 24 targets and 178 yards, so Joe Burrow is starting to look his way more often. Again, a Tennessee matchup coming up where Tennessee is going to come out guns blazing, ready to put it to Cincinnati. Joe Burrow is going to have to throw it quite a bit again. Marquez Callaway from New Orleans, 0.1% owned, going up against Chicago. The reason I'm going with Callaway this week is because probably Callaway is going to see he's not going to see the toughest matchup against Chicago. Now, I don't think that you're picking him up this week to start him by any means, because again, the matchup isn't great, but over his last couple of games, he's got 16 targets. We don't know when MT is going to be back. Will Sanders end up being cleared and being able to return at any point in time over the next week or two? We have to keep an eye on that situation as well. So for right now, Marquez Callaway is going to be my guy to add in New Orleans. Corey Davis, he's been out since week 3, makes his return this past week. 10 targets, 6 receptions, 35 yards, and 1 touchdown. So obviously, for 10 targets, 6 receptions, you hope to have a lot better yardage. You did end up having it, but first week back, 19% owned, going up against Cincinnati. Again, another situation where a lot of people may have dropped him in fantasy leagues because they were just tired of waiting on him. And then Nelson Aguilar, 1% owned, going up against Cleveland. Touchdowns in 3 straight games and 218 receiving yards over that span. He's a guy, 2 of the last 3 weeks I've had listed as a start, and in those 2 weeks, he's gone for 78 yards and 110 yards, and of course a touchdown in each of those. So Aguilar's been looking a lot better. Derek Carr is a guy that 100%, he is playing a lot better than people give him credit for. He's a guy that here at the Fantasy Headliners, we've always liked Carr. We think he's always been a guy that people have hated on. They say he can't push the ball down the field, but he can push the ball down the field. He just doesn't push the ball down the field that often. Aguilar's turning into a pretty decent weapon for him. I mean, heck, Carson Wentz couldn't even make Nelson Aguilar into a fantasy viable weapon, and Derek Carr's doing it. So sell it down, Philly fans. I'm just making a joke. All right, don't get upset with me, Philly. Just messing around. Let's go ahead and move on from wide receivers, though, and take a look at our tight ends. Trey Burton for Indianapolis. He's a guy over the last couple of weeks I told you to add. Coming off the bye this past week, though, they're going to be getting Detroit in week 8. Only 1% owned for Trey Burton. People still are not picking him up, which is surprising to me considering what he's done over the last couple of weeks. But if you are in need of a tight end, Trey Burton continues to be a guy with a really good floor because of how much they're using him in the passing game there. Richard Rodgers from Philadelphia. When is Dallas Goedert going to be back? Last week, Richard Rodgers going 8 targets, 6 receptions, 85 yards. Not a guy that I would like to rely on, but going up against Dallas could end up being a decent matchup for him. Tyler Kroft, 0.4% owned, going up against New England. When are all the other tight ends going to clear the COVID protocol? We'll keep an eye on that, but Tyler Kroft was the guy last week that a lot of people jumped on very late in the week. Not bad numbers, not great. Again, no real good ceiling, but if you're looking for somebody to use because he could end up being the only healthy tight end on the roster in week 8, you could have much less appealing options. And then Harrison Bryant from Cleveland. Now, you call me the tight end whisperer, and I don't miss on too many tight ends. That position is one that I really focus on quite a bit. I missed on Harrison Bryant last week. I thought for sure David Njoku was going to get a majority of the looks. Njoku outsnapped Bryant a couple weeks ago. Njoku's a guy that they're looking to possibly trade, so get him out on the field, show that he's healthy, show him off a little bit. They didn't do it. It was Bryant the entire way. No OBJ moving forward. Austin Hooper's going to be out in another week. Harrison Bryant goes 4 receptions on 5 targets for 56 yards and 2 touchdowns. So he's the guy that 100% going up against Las Vegas in week 8 could be a huge start for Baker Mayfield. All right, and now we're going to quick run through some of our streaming options like we do on all of our waiver wire videos, starting at quarterback. Teddy Bridgewater is my number 1 streamer for this coming week, going up against Atlanta, who gives up a ton of fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. Atlanta, they do give up the most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. Teddy Bridgewater finally getting that connection with DJ Moore a little bit more, which is good. Robbie Anderson continues to play well, so expect another good game from Teddy B in week 8. Derek Carr, talked about him when talked about Nelson Aguilar. Over his last 2 games, Derek Carr has 927 yards, and that's actually his last 3 games. 3 games, Derek Carr has 7 touchdowns and 924 passing yards. So he's a guy that offense is clicking. John Gruden kind of unlocking that. Going up against Tampa Bay, probably going to be throwing it quite a bit. The matchup isn't the best in the world, but Derek Carr is throwing the ball really well right now. So there could be a lot worse options out there if you're really not doing well at quarterback, or you need a streamer this week or whatever it may be. Derek Carr's been on fire and nobody's talking about it. And then Jimmy Garoppolo from San Francisco going up against Seattle in Week 8. Seattle has allowed the second most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. And over the last couple of games, Jimmy G has thrown for 250 plus yards. So he's looking a little bit better than he did a couple of weeks ago in that disaster of a game. But he's starting to pick it up a little bit more. So going up against Seattle, who again will probably, it's going to be a back and forth game. This is not going to be a game where likely San Francisco is going to be able to run the ball repeatedly the entire game. They're going to have to throw it, push the ball down the field a little bit, get Seattle off balance. If they can do that, then they've got a shot going up against Seattle. Seattle's going to be looking to come out firing too. And then moving on to our defensive special teams, the Los Angeles Chargers and the Philadelphia Eagles this week are my two. Denver's offense going up against the Chargers. Denver just hasn't looked great. That's a big thing with them right now. That offense is kind of all over the place. Losing Cortland Sutton hurt. Obviously, Drew Luck was hurt. He's back now, though. He hasn't looked like himself. And then Noah Fant's been hurt as well. So going up against the Chargers have a real good opportunity here to really force the hand with the Denver offense and make them make some mistakes. And then the Eagles going up against Dallas, they're over 50% owned, just barely. But I had to include them here because they're going to be going up against a third string quarterback. And when that happens, pretty good bet that the Philadelphia Eagles could make up some fantasy points on their end. All right, there you have it, Headliner Nation. My waiver wire targets for Week 8. Make sure you go out there and get those targets set up in your queue. As always, make sure you leave a comment down below if you got questions on any players that may not have been included here. And then also leave a like down below if you appreciate the content. And as always, hit that subscribe button and become a part of Headliner Nation today. Almost to 110,000 subscribers. Love you, Headliner Nation. Stay safe, stay healthy, and I will catch you on the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners.